Hi, if you're new here, all you need to know is that I've watched the first season of the One Piece live-action adaptation, and now, for the first time ever, I am reading the manga, and, more specifically, the first 100 chapters that the live-action has covered so far. With all of that said, let's begin. Today I'll be covering the chapters in Volume 5 from 36 to 44. This might be recency bias, but I loved this volume so much. I loved Usopp's arc in general. I've heard that the general consensus is that this arc is one of the weakest in One Piece, and I just don't get it. But I'll give you my final verdict and final thoughts about Syrup Village after going through the events in these chapters, mostly in order, as always. So chapter 36 starts with Kaya and the kids in danger. I adore how Usopp was trying to get to them so that he could protect them even if he physically couldn't move anymore due to the hits he took in the last volume. I also loved how other characters were shown to be moved by Usopp's willingness to save his people even if he died in the process. Luffy looked particularly passionate about it. He even threatened Kuro's pirates when they started mocking Usopp for his desperate efforts. It makes sense Luffy would do that because one of the qualities he admires most is when people have a goal and are ready to do absolutely anything for that goal, even if it means putting their lives on the line. We saw it over and over again, and because I've seen the live action, I know this will continue in the future as well. After that, Zoro and Usopp managed to separate from the main fight to go after Kaya and the kids. And I love the subtle joke that Zoro is aware of being hopeless with direction because he straight up told Usopp that he'd never find his way without Usopp guiding him. To be fair, in that situation, this would be true for anyone, not just Zoro. Even his navigational problems aside, it makes sense that a local would know their way around the woods, while someone who just got here would get lost. It's just that, personally, I love this little gag a lot, so that's why I'm focusing on it so much. Next, we get to see a bit more of the fight between Luffy and Kuro, and it's a little detail, but I love how Kuro was hitting all the fancy poses. I kind of wish that some of those panels were bigger and more detailed because they looked really cool. If Kuro wanted to go legitimate so badly, he should have become a dancer. Then we get a flashback to how exactly Kuro faked his death. In the live action, very early on, they reveal that people thought that Morgan had captured and killed Kuro. But in the manga, this information hadn't been mentioned up until now, almost at the end of this arc. Honestly, I was even beginning to think that this was something that the live action made up. But apparently, that piece of information was absolutely true, and I love how many little but cool things this flashback revealed. First of all, it was Kuro who'd broken Morgan's jaw. We also got a tease of how powerful Kuro is, and that he has the ability to massacre whole groups of people all by himself, a move that we also see him use later in this volume against his own crew and Luffy. And most importantly, we find out that apparently Django hypnotized Morgan into thinking he captured Kuro. The live action made it seem like Morgan was a fraud, like he probably just took credit for something he didn't do. And that fit with how Morgan was portrayed in the live action. But since in the manga we have a hypnotist, that changes a lot of things. I even felt a little bit bad for Morgan. Very little, because he's a horrible human being, but still. I would hate to take credit for something I didn't do, and Morgan didn't have a choice in that matter. I wonder if perhaps one of the reasons why his ego is as bad as it is in the present time was influenced by this whole event in the past. I also loved the small joke thrown in at the end of that flashback that Django, once again, hypnotized himself too and believed he was the one who captured Captain Kuro. After learning about Kuro's plan, Luffy, obviously, absolutely hates such approach. He breaks Kuro's claws, and while I don't have much to say about this scene, it simply felt satisfying. Next, the scene jumps to Kaya and the kids, and everything about the first part of it was hilarious. Django was frustrated because Kaya simply closed her eyes and refused to open them. It's such a simple but brilliant way to deal with someone like Django. And then the kids attacked him and pulled the same move that Luffy had used against Buggy. You all know exactly which move I'm talking about. The kids also revealed they only pretended to be hypnotized, and I found it really funny when Onion said that they wouldn't fall for the same trick twice, because Luffy did fall for that same trick twice. So, canonically, 9-year-olds are smarter than Luffy. We go back to the fight at the beach where Kuro is openly saying he'll kill all his men. Luffy starts insulting him, and my favorite one was saying that Kuro could never beat Usopp. Obviously, that only makes Kuro angrier, so he goes from threats to actually attacking everyone. I love the concept that Kuro was moving so fast that even he didn't know what he was slashing. We saw how Luffy noticed that he cut just a cliffside where no one was actually standing. I also absolutely love the fact that while all of this action was happening, Nami was doing her own thing and collecting all the treasure from Kuro's ship. But obviously, the most important thing in this scene is Luffy getting very emotional about the fact that Kuro attacked his own crew. Our boy literally can't comprehend such concept. One Piece story is very long, so I believe I am not crazy for thinking that sooner or later the Straw Hats will experience some serious inner disagreements, and I am curious to see how such plotline would be handled. But I believe that any falling out would be temporary. The thing that Kuro is doing to his own crew here is absolutely foreign to Luffy. He would die before ever turning on his own crew. A bit later in this volume, he actually tells Kuro that he'll never become a pirate like him. So the massacre stops when Luffy catches Kuro. He has some crazy quick reflexes because he managed to do that right as he felt he was getting cut. And while Luffy is stupid, and there's no softer way I can phrase this, he is clever and creative when it comes to fights. Here, not only he catches Kuro, but he also latches onto him so that he couldn't start moving like crazy again. The scene jumps back to the forest, and in my opinion, that's where Kaya's character truly shined. She threatened to take her own life to protect the kids. It's a relatively common trope you can encounter in stories, but it never fails to hit because it's so extreme. In One Piece, Kaya making such active move was exactly what I wanted to see from her this entire arc. And the fact that she did all that to save the kids and didn't care about herself or her fortune made that scene more emotional. I mean, the girl had a relieved smile on her face as she thought she was about to die. Another very emotional thing was the kids, once again, pretending to be unconscious while in reality they were debating about what they should do. They are little kids, so of course they are scared and just want to get out of this fight okay. But at the same time they think that leaving Kaya to die is simply wrong. Most importantly, they get inspired by Usopp. Usopp told them to run if they ever thought they couldn't win a fight. But they also witnessed how that's not what Usopp himself did, how he fought against impossible odds, all to protect them, and that example now spurs the kids to take action too. I said it before and I'll say it again. Removing these kids from the live action was a crime, even if I understand that working with child actors is difficult and just in general, screen time was limited and some things and some characters just had to be cut. But for me, personally, the relationship that Usopp had with these 3 little kids was the emotional core of this arc in the manga. After that, luckily, Zoro and Usopp finally find Kaya. I continue to be always amazed by the author's ability to insert comedy into such dire situations. In this case, it was the interactions between Zoro and Usopp, as well as the kids using the shovel in a creative manner. After that, we get back into serious action. The teamwork between Usopp and Zoro was insanely cool. In general, these two make an unexpected pair, and yet somehow they worked brilliantly well together in that scene. When you have an ensemble cast, a lot of stories run into the same problem when they either pair all characters up or divide the whole group into smaller groups. In other words, not all characters get to interact and form meaningful connections with every other character. And it's really disappointing because that's the whole point of having a large ensemble cast instead of a few main characters. So far, One Piece looks like it will actually handle a larger cast of characters correctly. Even if we look at live action, I think the whole cast was handled pretty well there too. The only character in the live action who feels like he integrated into the group a bit more poorly than the others is Usopp, but Season 2 is coming out pretty soon, so I think there will be plenty of opportunities to fix that. In the meantime, I like that the manga is giving us all these small moments with Usopp and the group, like the fun interactions with Nami in the previous volume, or a cool teamwork with Zoro in this volume. Next, we get my favorite comedy moment from Luffy in this volume. If last volume it was a joke about North, then this volume it's Luffy getting angry when Kura's pirates started rooting for him. When they first started cheering him on, I thought it would be a sweet moment, maybe even something that parallels when the Marines and the townspeople were happy about Luffy defeating Captain Morgan. But then Luffy flipped my expectations when he angrily asked, "Who said you could root for me?" and then threatened to get those guys too. I don't even know why, but this specific joke really got me. Next, we see the end to both the fight at the beach and in the forest. And I really appreciate that the live action kept the fact that Luffy's finishing move against Kuro was a headbutt, even if the rest of the fight played out so differently. I feel like that one move carried a lot of the ridiculous spirit of the One Piece manga into the live action. Once the fight was over, Luffy fell from all the blood loss, and it was so sweet how Nami was there to catch him. I know that's another common trope, but I'm a sucker for things like these. And this moment feels even more significant since I watched the live action and I know the Arlong arc is coming up soon, and Nami, as well as her relationship with the crew and with Luffy, will get all the focus there. Next we see Usopp asking everyone to keep the fight a secret, and I loved it so much. The only time he had a real fight, he decided to keep it a secret, all for the peace of mind of the villagers. It ties back to what Usopp said in Volume 4, how this would be another boring day for the village. I know I already spoke about the Straw Hats being kind multiple times, but I want to say it again. Usopp is insanely kind, and he was absolutely the unsung hero of this arc. Then the manga just kept going all out with the emotions, because we saw how the villagers actually missed Usopp. Even if he was frustrating, Usopp was a huge part of their daily routines. Normally, you'd think it was disrupting how he was running around every day and screaming about pirates, but it turned out that for the villagers, the truly disrupting thing was the one time when Usopp didn't show up, and it felt like a very sweet moment. And finally, it turned out that all these sweet moments were there to prepare the readers for the final big emotional punch, and that is the conversation Usopp had with the kids. It wasn't some death or loss or any truly dramatic moment, and yet that whole scene made me tear up, and I have no idea how Oda keeps doing that over and over again. Maybe it was because of the quick flashbacks to all the fun this group had, and maybe it was Usopp asking the kids about their ambitions and then telling them to keep those dreams alive. The thing is that I genuinely don't understand, but all I know is that this scene was insanely beautiful and emotional. If I ever make a list of my favorite moments in the manga, this one's definitely going into that. Luckily, chapter 41 was much more lighthearted. It started with a whole joke about Zoro and Luffy eating the bones of fish, and it was really funny how Nami was dangling the bones in front of them and saying something along the lines of, "Hey, you idiots, normal people don't eat this part." It's such a stupid joke, but that's the beauty of One Piece. Stupid jokes like these simply work here somehow. Then we get a scene where Kaya offers our crew a ship. She reveals that her illness was caused by grief. I'll admit that I actually like what the live action did with that a bit more, because there she was sick because of poison, and the illness disappeared once Kuro was gone. In the manga, she just kind of decided to magically get better. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to discredit Kaya. Even in real life, emotional pain absolutely does manifest through physical symptoms, so it's pretty realistic that Kaya got sick from the grief. The problem is that recent events revolved around the betrayal from Klahadore and also a direct danger to her life as well as to the village. It wasn't about facing that grief, so for me, this resolution wasn't really convincing. But at the same time, I also don't mind it, because convictions and beliefs are a huge theme in One Piece, so it still fits, even if personally, I don't think it was the best resolution to the whole illness plotline. Other than this small detail, I think the whole ending of this arc was much better in the manga. My favorite part was Usopp deciding to live fully on his own. In the live action, he was reluctant to leave. He didn't want to leave his village and, most importantly, Kaya. And he had to be convinced by the others. In the manga, he decided to go off to sea fully on his own. I loved the part where Usopp said that he has to act before his resolve weakens. I know I mentioned it before, but I want to mention it again, that Usopp reminds me of Kobe, because they both feel scared but still try to do brave things. Compared to Luffy or Zoro, Usopp feels like a completely normal person, so of course the thought of going off to sea where all kinds of dangers await makes his legs shake, and yet he's still doing that, and he asks others to let him go before he changes his mind. A small but great moment for his character. Once they leave, Mary tells Kaya the story about how Usopp's lies began in the first place. It turns out that my theory from one of the earlier videos was wrong, and the story about Usopp's mother wasn't a live-action original edition. And on top of that, this story worked so much better in the manga. I think in the live-action it translated a little bit poorly. It was a subtle change, but it made a huge difference. In the live-action, they framed Usopp's lies in a more dramatic manner, and it fell a little bit flat in my opinion. But in the manga, his lies were framed as something that held his biggest and deepest desire. So personally, I think that manga Usopp feels like he has more emotional depth than the live-action Usopp, even if I liked some individual scenes in the live-action more, like Usopp and Luffy talking about Usopp's dad. It's also a fun detail that Usopp dreamed that his dad would come back and take him away, but instead, it was someone who has a connection to his dad. Usopp didn't get his family back, but he got a new family, and there are ways in which both those families are related. I also feel like we have to get a reunion at some point. Shanks with Luffy and Yasopp with Usopp. But that's probably something that will happen in a very far future. One final sweet moment to wrap up this arc in the manga was the fact that the three kids continued Usopp's work and started shouting about the pirates instead of him. But now it's finally time to talk about the Syrup Village arc as a whole and compare it to the live action. In short, I think that overall, the manga was better, but there were certain elements that the live action improved in my opinion. I'll start with the things I think the live action did better. First of all, let's talk about the action. I think it was a good concept to have a lockdown in the mansion. It created more tension, where the characters were split up and trapped. They didn't know how the others were doing, and also no one had the full picture because they were all separated and didn't have the opportunities to talk and make a plan. It was also nighttime instead of early morning, which added to the whole spooky vibe the live action was going for. Buchi and Sham went from the most forgettable part in the manga to one of the best parts in this arc of the live action. They were simply fun to watch in the live action, and they had way more personality than they did in the manga. I also loved that our crew had some time to befriend Kaya before the action. Nami and Kaya duo was one of the standouts in this arc. Another great thing was how Zoro's backstory was handled in the live action. Once again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I adore that whole sequence that happened to him at the bottom of the well. I know it's probably an unpopular opinion, but I also enjoyed that the Marines, more specifically Kobe, Helmeppo and Garp, were always involved somehow, from start to finish. But it's important to remember that the live action had the benefit of having a lot of material to work with, where they can switch things around a bit and introduce certain plot points earlier in order to grab the attention of the first-time viewers. I also like the change that Luffy wanted that going merry ship from the very beginning. It was like, out of all the other ships in the docks, it was that specific ship that called to Luffy, while in the manga, the crew got whatever Mary picked. There were also many smaller scenes and moments that made the live action very enjoyable, like the bet that Nami and Luffy made, for example. But, like I said, overall, I think this arc in the manga was still better. The main reasons, like I said, were the resolution to this arc, which I already spoke about earlier in this video, and also Usopp's character. At this point in the manga, he is the best character. I believe that will change very soon, but at this point, he is the best, and the live action really did him dirty. Don't get me wrong, it absolutely doesn't mean I love the live action any less. I adored everything about that show when I first watched it, and I still love it. Many things are different from the manga, but the show is still great as its own thing in different ways, and I am not going to start talking poorly about the show just because I started reading the manga. But I can admit that while I love the show, Usopp was written better in the manga. I read some comments from you that apparently Usopp was supposed to have more scenes in the live action, and at some point I'll probably do some more research into that, but those scenes didn't make it into the final cut. So Season 2 now has a serious task to make up for it. So those are my final thoughts about the Syrup Village arc, and now it's time to move on to the Baratia arc, because that's how Volume 5 ends, with the introduction of that. First, I want to get one awkward thing out of the way. I called Zeph Jeff in one of the videos. The funny thing is that as I recorded that, I actually paused and thought, wait, is that really his name? But in the end, I didn't check it and just went with Jeff. I apologize for disrespecting this glorious man, his glorious hat, and his glorious mustache. With all my nonsense out of the way, let's go to chapter 42. We see the crew painting and putting up their pirate flag. I actually really like how the live action changed it and turned the final flag into a surprise for Luffy at the end of the season. But I absolutely loved the joke they made in the manga. When Zoro saw the flag, he said, "A pirate flag ought to inspire terror, and this is pretty scary." Funnily enough, I feel like it actually accurately describes how other pirate crew must see the Straw Hats. These guys are strange, and because they are so strange, they are unpredictable, and it's scary when you have no idea what someone will do next. Another important thing that happened this chapter was that our crew decided they need one more member, and more specifically a cook. Once again, the same pattern continues because in the manga, all members were recruited more or less purposefully, but in the live action, it was all through chance meetings. The whole plotline about Yosaku and Johnny was pretty entertaining, but other than that, I don't have much to say about them. They served as a transitional plot device and introduced Baratia to our crew. They also mentioned Mihawk to Zoro. Obviously, in the manga, they merely refer to him as Hawkeye, someone that Zoro is hunting, but from the live action, we all know exactly who they were talking about. I actually like that he's mentioned earlier here, because, once again, in the live action it was just a chance meeting, while in the manga, Zoro goes to Baratia fully aware that there's a small chance he might run into Mihawk. In the live action, before Baratia arc, we had the whole battle with the marine ship and the reveal that Garp is Luffy's grandfather. But since the marine plotline is a live-action original thing, I actually didn't expect to run into the marines in the manga right here. But apparently, that battle happened in both versions, only against different people. And on top of that, in the manga Luffy accidentally sent the cannonball at the restaurant instead of back at the marine ship. That's the reason for being told to wash dishes for a year instead of the unpaid meal how they did it in the live action. This scene in the manga was funny, but I also really adored the dinner scene in the live action, the banter of the group and how they seemed to bond. In the chaos of the battle, Nami finds a wanted poster of Arlong. Obviously, in the manga it's still hidden at this point and we only see a silhouette. I like how both with Nami and earlier with Zoro, we get these subtle hints that tease that something is about to happen. With Nami, the live action took a more direct approach by straight up showing she was in secret communication with someone early in the season. After that, finally, we get to meet Sanji. In the live action, this was the arc where I went from loving the show to being fully obsessed with it, and Sanji was a character who shot to the top of my list from the very first scene where he was introduced. He was just such a joy to watch. That also means that I had high expectations going into the manga, and I am glad I can say that so far Sanji seems just as cool as he did in the live action. His introduction was definitely very strong. I love how much he swears and that it's absolutely canon and not just something that the live action made up. Obviously, a lot depends on the translation, but in the official colored version, it was actually explained that in the original Japanese, Sanji swears a lot and also very rudely, but some translations, including the official release, tone it down. But since I read the official colored version, I'm glad I got to experience the unfiltered version. I hope none of you take what I'm saying in the wrong way. It's not about the swears, but about the fact that the characters are given unique voices. For example, both Sanji and Zoro can be called rude, but when they speak, they don't sound the same, and that's very important. My favorite comedy bit in this volume that didn't come from Luffy was when to the question, "What's this fly doing in my soup?" Sanji responded, "It appears to be the backstroke." It's just so brilliant. In just a few pages, we got a very clear picture of Sanji's personality. Confident, rude, prone to violence, but also proud in what he does, and by the end of this volume, we could also add having a heart of gold to that list. I love how the thing that angered him the most was wasting food. It wasn't too different in the live action. There, he also beat up customers who dared to disrupt the peace of the restaurant. I want to share one cool detail that I noticed. I actually rewound that scene to check what was the exact reason Sanji beat up those customers, and I noticed that before beating them up, he offered them some wine on the house to calm them down. And that wine was the exact same type that the Marine Full Body incorrectly named in the manga, and that kickstarted the whole conflict between him and Sanji. Also, based on the design, I'm pretty sure one of those customers in the live action, the one with pink hair, was supposed to represent Full Body himself. That's one more reason why I'm excited to rewatch the show. There's probably a ton of references like this. The manga then switched to Luffy and Zeff trying to make a deal. It was so hilarious how Zeff said that if Luffy doesn't want to work for a year, then he could just give Zeff his leg. After that, we also got to meet Patty, and I don't even know where I should begin when it comes to him. In my notes, I literally just wrote down his name and drew a heart beside it, and I think that says more than anything I could tell you right now. The manga part where Sanji, Zeff, and Patty were all in the same scene was just pure chaos. It was Luffy, out of all people, who looked at them and said, "This is a madhouse." And that alone shows you how chaotic it was. Then a starving pirate came into the restaurant. He was also in the live action, but there, he washed up after losing his crew and begged for food, while in the manga, he acted like a more traditional pirate and threatened everyone to get food. The important thing was that in both versions, Sanji fed him when he wasn't supposed to. I like how in the manga, the pirate started talking about not being worthy, But Sanji doesn't care if you're worthy or not, if you have money or not, because as long as you appreciate the food he makes, that's not a waste. And that's where Volume 5 ends. Before I leave, there are a few things I want to mention. First, I'm really enjoying the cover stories. Those pages were really funny, and because you only get one page for one chapter, they have to be effective if you want readers to remember them. And so far, I think Oda is successful by creating a little bit of unexpected comedy in each page. Those pages are like Luffy, you never know what will happen next. When it comes to the SBS section, you have no idea how much I loved Oda's response to the question about why he pretty much never uses screen tones. He started writing that it's a pain in the ass, then crossed it out and gave a more appropriate response. And it's just so relatable. I've watched some videos about the process of manga creation, and yes, those screen tones, while they look very cool, definitely seem like a pain in the ass to add. And finally, there was a section that explained that Sanji's name sounds like number 3, and that apparently it will somehow be relevant to his character. I'm so curious about that. Knowing One Piece, it could be anything from something serious to something utterly ridiculous. Most likely both at the same time. And at this point, I don't think I have the brain capacity to make any concrete theory. If it was any other story, I would make a theory that Sanji has or will have some special powers that have something to do with number 3. But because it's One Piece, I'm pretty sure that's actually one of the things that will not happen, and number 3 relates to something else. As always, please don't spoil me. And that's it for now. This review ended up insanely long and it will be a pain in the ass to edit for me. But thank you for listening if you are still here. Share your own thoughts in the comments. And if you are interested, you can subscribe and I'll see you again as I review Volume 6.